Let's talk about what it really means if half of the Department of Education's workforce is fired, which is slated to happen tomorrow. Because when politicians throw out numbers, they don't always tell you the consequences. First, let's be clear. The Department of Education isn't some bloated bureaucracy sitting in Washington doing absolutely nothing. It's the backbone of our country's education system. It ensures that students, especially those in marginalized communities, have access to the resources they need to learn, graduate, and have a fair shot at life. So, what actually happens once it's final that half of the workforce is gone? If you've ever applied for student loans, you already know how complicated the system is. Now imagine half the staff that manages those loans gone, Pell Grant disbursements delayed, loan forgiveness programs stuck in limbo, the people who process income-driven repayment plans fired. Millions of borrowers struggle with debt, could be left without assistance, and those seeking relief through programs like public service loan forgiveness, good luck. Special education and disability services will be at risk. The Department of Education enforces laws like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This ensures that students with disabilities get the services and support they're legally entitled to. Firing half the workforce means fewer staff to oversee compliance, fewer investigations into schools, failing these students, and fewer protections for families fighting to get their children the education they deserve. Civil rights protections will be gutted. The Office for Civil Rights investigates discrimination in schools. That includes cases of racial discrimination, sexual harassment, and unfair discipline policies that disproportionately target Black and brown children. Cutting half the department means fewer investigations, fewer accountability measures, and more schools getting away with discrimination unchecked. Schools address sexual harassment and assault. It protects pregnant and parenting students. It ensures women's sports programs receive fair funding. Now imagine trying to enforce all of that with half the workforce. Survivors seeking cases may find their cases stalled or ignored. Schools already failing to uphold this title will have even less oversight. Rural and low-income students will take the biggest hit. Many public schools rely on federal grants and programs to stay afloat. Schools in rural areas and low-income communities get Title I funding to provide extra resources, better teachers, and essential programs. If you slash half the workforce, who's left to manage these grants? Who's making sure that these schools get exactly what they need? More power to the states, but at what cost? Let's be real. If the federal government steps back, that power doesn't disappear. It shifts to the states. And in some states, that means more funding for wealthy districts and fewer resources for poor Black and brown communities. It means states that already underfund public schools will have even less incentive to meet national standards. This isn't educational freedom. It's educational inequality. So who really benefits here? The push to fire half the workforce isn't about improving education. It's about dismantling federal oversight. It's about opening the door for privatization, pushing families toward charter schools and voucher programs that don't have to follow the same rules as public schools. It's about stripping public schools of resources until they fail so that for-profit education companies can step in and turn our children's education into a business. This isn't about draining the swamp. It's about draining our schools. And the people who suffer most, Black and brown children, students with disabilities, and working class families. So before we celebrate massive job cuts at the Department of Education, we need to ask, who really wins? Because it's not our kids.